Hi there. In this video, we'll cover the concept of project breakdown structures. Structures means there are ways of breaking down project scope, and we mean here scope meaning that what will be done. So it's the WBS, and who will do this work, which is the OBS or organizational breakdown structure. So we'll cover in this video two types of breakdown structures, WBS and OBS. So going back to the big picture here, this is the process of developing a project plan. We covered the first step, which is understanding the scope of the project, and the next step would be to generate a list of activities using WBS and matching it with the organization breakdown structure of the project. So the project schedule is composed of activities. Software that's used for project scheduling call these tasks. So regardless of the name, activities, tasks, each one of these activities or tasks is basically a simple step of the work that should satisfy these requirements here. First, it should have a discrete continuous duration with recognizable start and finish. So no intermediate interruption. This is the idea here. The duration, just whenever you started, you end it continuously. And then it should have a measurable scope. This activity should have a measurable scope that can be measured in quantities that common in managing construction projects. So square foot, square yards, cubic yards. So it can be measurable, so it can be tracked, so we know how much of the work is done. And then also it should have a single responsibility that can be assigned to the general contractor, the GC, or a subcontractor. So the responsibility is not diluted between multiple entities, and again, tracking and control will not function well if you have this responsibility not clearly assigned to someone or an entity in the project. So there are three types of activities that should be included in a project schedule. The first one is production activities. So these physical activities that directly relate to building that entity, that component or system of the project. So you excavate for the foundation, you put the formwork for the foundation, you pour the concrete. So it's very production oriented. And then there's the procurement activities. So the activities that are needed to supply the material and manufacture the assemblies. And then there is the management activities. So to procure the materials and assemblies, you have to go through submittals and approvals. So like management activities that control the procurement and production activities. Some people forget about the management activities and including them in the schedule, but they're very important, and sometimes they come with very long lead times. They need a lot of approval time, and it needs a lot of time that is not visible initially when you think about the scope of the project. So construction projects include a lot of activities, hundreds and sometimes thousands. And to come up with these activities, you need a structured way of breaking down the scope. So WBS, or work breakdown structure, is a graphical tool to help you through the process of coming up with this list of activities. So WBS is a tool to describe the project scope in a hierarchical way. So it's a hierarchy diagram. It can be a diagram, it can be a table. It's just a matter of the whatever tool or representation you use, it should have levels of hierarchy and breakdown steps. So the WS here defines what will be done in the project and the hierarchy or the relation between the different packages or components of the building. So you see here the building can be broken down into site works, foundation, and structural. So every one of these blocks here is a work package within the building project. And then I can break this further into through different levels until I reach a level that I feel this is the activities, and I cannot, or I can, but it's not it's not returning any benefit more if I break it further. It's actually harming me more because it's now more activities to manage and include in the project plan. So for example, the foundation here entails excavating, piling, constructing the pile caps, and then backfilling. I can branch each one of these package individually, but I can here follow just for the sake as an example. Pile caps can be broken down into forms, rebar, and concrete. As an example, just breaking the rebar here, these activities here prepare the shop drawing. So again, this is a management activity. Cut and fabricate, deliver procurement activities, and then place or set the production activities. So let's see an example here. So we would go through a quick example exercise of constructing a WBS for a project that includes 3 buildings. The classroom building, this is description of it, 3 stories. The structure system is concrete beam slab system, and it includes here the brickwork and finishes. The administration building is similar to the classroom building, and then there is the gym and courts, which is a 1-story concrete frame structure, and the scope includes here brickwork and finishes. So if you develop the WBS, you start with the first level, is you break down the project into the main packages. So logically, you have 3 buildings, so you have the higher level here is 3 packages. And then you start breaking down the WBS, every package here, by systems and by components, until you reach a level where now you reach a level of packages where to define them, you will define them by verbs, or what we call activities or tasks. And this is an indication that this is the level you should stop. So whenever you switch from a component or system, kind of electrical system, that's not a verb, it's a noun. Whenever you move from nouns to verbs in defining your packages, then this verb packages are actually activities. And this is a level that would be sufficient to stop at. So as an example here, you have the classroom building, you have substructure and superstructure. I'm not breaking further the other buildings, just following here the tracing, one branch after a branch. So next would be the superstructure, following its breakdown, floors 1, 2, 3. Picking one floor, breaking it down, you have concrete, brickwork, finishes. Again, remember the description, I could have other systems included, but in the scope that's described to us, it has only these 3 packages. I can break down further the concrete, I have slabs, beams, and columns, break down further the columns, formwork, reinforcement, and concrete placement. You see, formwork is a component, it's not a verb yet. Concrete placement, kind of, it's an activity. So I can break down further here, but here, whenever I feel I'm getting closer to the level where I should stop, I should be careful about breaking down further. Because again, remember, it's a trade-off between detail and the burden of managing that big and inflated schedule or plan. So breaking down the scope of the project is a skill, and you will gain it by practice and over time with experience. And one thing also, there is no single correct WBS, meaning that I can come up with a WBS and you come up with another WBS, different look, different feel, but both can be correct as long as we cover all the scope and cover here between big parentheses, meaning that all the scope is reflected, but it can be reflected in different ways. So here, these are the activities now, like shattering, meaning installing the formwork and then removing the formwork, preparing the formwork and fixing it or installing it, pouring the concrete and then curing it. Curing can be an activity instead of just wasting time until the concrete cure. If you're actually putting an effort to cure the concrete, like spraying water or putting, cover sheets on the concrete. So if it requires resources, then it's a task. If it's just a wait of time, we'll see how we can deal with it in the schedules using lags between activities. A second example, which we'll deal with it in the classroom, in the synchronous meeting we have for the classroom, and for the course. So developing a WBS for this bridge schematic. So with that simple schematic, you will be surprised by how big or how detailed you can make the WBS. So think about it, look at the schematic here, and come prepared to the class with an idea of how the WBS will look like. Another or a third exercise here is developing an WBS. Now if we have multiple views or plans of self-storage facility. So we have here a plan, elevation of a typical bay of storage, and a cross section here in section A. It shows different systems, but you can also detail the scope here using WBS. And probably that will be more or a bigger WBS than the bridge exercise. So please study the information given and come to the synchronous class. We'll have a discussion on developing the WBS here. So part of defining the scope and describing it and communicating it using WBS, beside that, you need to communicate the work and scope of work to the subs. And that's an important document that's produced by the general contractor, the GC or the prime contractor, to communicate the scope that's outsourced or delegated to the subs. And that's done through scope of work statement or a request for proposals. So the GC send RFPs to subs to respond to these, and the RFP will include different information. The project information, any general conditions that are passed from the owner to the GC, which are passed from the GC to the subs. And the third main part here is the scope of work, statement of scope of work. And it's very, very important. So you communicate the scope to the subs and making sure nothing leaks between the cracks or the lines of the subs scopes. So check the example that I posted for a plumbing scope of work in the course webpage. Coding system is a way to communicate the scope of work and that's represented in the WBS using coding system. So the coding numbers. So it's a numbering system. It's just a way to replace the long descriptions that you define the concrete of the columns and the third floor of this building. I've shortened that into just a numbering system. So when I say activity 01A 2000, you will understand what it refers to. And it's a numbering system, so it's easy to code in computers and use in computer systems. Like Microsoft Project or Primavera, P6, all these software to produce project schedules, it's better to use a coding system. And the US CSI massive format, like we covered in the previous video, is a good way to use in a coding system for a project. And coding systems here will be provide different benefits. The main ones here is just if it's a standard coding system like CSI master format, it will be kind of a checklist. So if you have the full checklist or the full master format, you go through it and you say, yes, I have this in the project. No, I don't have it. Yes, I have it. And also it provides uniformity between projects. So remember, you're not only doing one project, you're doing multiple projects and they share the same type of work. So for control purposes, you want to know how good you did of this activity in this project versus future projects or previous projects. So it's good to standardize so you can compare your performance between projects. And master format can be part of a bigger project coding system. So for example here, your coding system can include a project code. So you have multiple projects, so you have a project code, and then if the project is big, then you'll have segments of it or areas or buildings, And then you will have the work type code, which is the RS means the master format. Sorry, so CSI master format. And then you can actually detail the work to be the different distribution codes, or what we call the cost code. For planning purposes or scheduling purposes, you only would be dealing with the 3 segments of the code here. So for example here, this is a code of an activity. So 88 NB0104, that's the code for a project. From the code you can get information about the project. And then the area within the project, it's the 11th floor, and then 03320 is the CSI master format referring to the concrete lightweight aggregate. So 03 concrete, and then lightweight aggregate is 320. And then for tracking purposes, you can have distribution codes. 02 here, or 2 refers to the material cost. But for scheduling, you can just pause here or stop here, and this will be the code. This activity will be 88 NB04 11 03 320. The last thing we'll cover here is OBS, Organization Breakdown Structure. So the same way you break the scope of the project from the perspective of the work, you can break the scope from the perspective of responsibilities, or how the organization of the team working on the project will be broken down. So it defines responsibilities and the channels of communication and responsibility within the project. So project manager can supervise subs and the general contractor team. Within the general contractor team, there will be different superintendents, and for every superintendent, they will manage different foremen. Just an example, OBS. You can have a different OBS. Every company have different ways of managing the projects using different OBS. The nice thing here is now, which not a lot of companies do, but you can match WBS to the OBS. So you can have kind of matrix relation between the different work packages in the WBS and the different organizational entities within the OBS. And that matrix here, every intersection will be what we call the control account. So this work package will be the responsibility of this entity within the project organization. So it provides clarity and transparency for tracking and controlling the project. So we're moving fast in the process of producing project plans. We covered in the previous video the scope of work, how to define it, how to understand it, and then how to present it using WBS and OBS in this video. In the next video, we'll cover quantity takeoffs and how to quantify the scope now of the activities. So you calculate the durations and costs and define resources for them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in future videos. Take care.